I'm aware of the time, and my sermon's only about 45 minutes, so we'll be a little bit late today, and it'll be okay. The cake for our new members will still be there. I'm wondering if you've heard the story about anthropologist Margaret Mead when she was asked to identify the earliest material sign of human civilization. What would it be? The use of tools or art or methods of cultivating plants used for food? Instead of pointing to those, Mead stated that the earliest sign of human civilization was a broken and then healed thigh bone from 15,000 years ago. A broken femur would not be unusual to find in human remains, but a broken femur that had healed meant that someone had tended to that person and not left them to die. For the many weeks it would take for that bone to heal, a person with a broken femur would not be able to find food or run for safety or work. They would need to be cared for, fed, and likely carried if that group needed to move. This broken and then healed femur is evidence of our own human ability to put aside our own individual interests for the interest of another or for the interest of a group. It is evidence of our interdependence. The poet that Barb read so beautifully writes, "What would happen if we decided to survive more, to love harder? What if we said no to the rising tides and stood for the many mute mouths of the sea and of the land? What would happen if we used our bodies to bargain for the safety of others, for Earth?" What if indeed? What would that mean for our world, for our communities, for our church, for our families? This past summer, I attended General Assembly in Pittsburgh. General Assembly, or GA as we call it, is our movement's annual gathering to do the business of our association and also to gather for education, worship, and fellowship. At GA, I attended a workshop called Disrupt Church. The speakers were Reverend Peggy Clark, who is the minister at the Community Church in Midtown Manhattan, and Jill Novensky, the director of religious education at that church. At the workshop, Reverend Peggy and Jill were taking the listeners through many of the issues that are facing religious communities today, including these facts, which are, I will admit, a little depressing. Although in surveys, Gen Z people still express religious beliefs, they also express very little interest in joining a church. The fact that membership numbers in all denominations, including ours, are declining. The fact that our congregation's average age is increasing, meaning fewer young people and families are part of our congregations. That although roughly the same number of ministers are entering the UU ministry each year, fewer and fewer are choosing to serve congregations, choosing instead to be chaplains or to serve nonprofits or as an entrepreneur. In fact, in the past, it was typical to have about 50 ministers in search for a congregation in our UU search process, and this past year there were 17. Now, we UUs are not alone in this time of upheaval for religious institutions. Reverend Peggy and Jill in their workshop didn't so much offer answers or solutions, but instead hoped to open a discussion about how we do church and for people to share their hopes for our faith. The discussions are ongoing, and if you're interested and on Facebook, there's a Facebook group called Disrupt Church that you could join. The part of the workshop that had the most impact on me was their discussion of the work of John Alexander and Ariane Conrad. Together, those two wrote a book called Citizens: Why the Key to Fixing Everything is All of Us. In it, they describe 3 different stories to frame how human organizations work. The 3 stories are the subject story, the consumer story, and the citizen story. In the subject story, there is a person or a small group of people who are in total charge. This structure is often patriarchal, and the people are dependent on this ruler or small group. Within the hierarchy, the people are subject to whatever these rulers or leaders decree, and the expectation is that the people will obey these commands, and in exchange, the leaders will keep them safe. Think of a monarchy, think of an autocracy, or even a family where one parent rules with an iron fist. The second story is the consumer story. People who have been living as subjects find it incredibly liberating to move to being a consumer instead. In the consumer story, people have choices, and they want to exercise that right to choose. People in the consumer story also feel a little entitled to things, including wanting to be served. People believe themselves to be independent agents, and that each person pursuing their own self-interest will somehow add up to all our collective interest. Society is about competition. Trickle-down economics is part of this consumer story. Does it sound familiar to you? Yeah. This is the story we're living in the US at the moment. But the third possibility is the citizen story, in which the people are not dependent or independent, but, can you guess? Interdependent, yes. They join together to build collective power. They don't obey a ruler or demand their own way, but they participate to help create what is needed for all. This is a move from what I want to what we need. The citizen story is about the empowerment of all of us to co-invent and to nurture our own futures. So here's a graphic that from the workshop that helps illustrate these three stories. Molly's going to put it up. Great. I'll be quiet a minute so you can just look. With the unfolding of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw all three of these stories play out. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's a helpful illustration. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were embodying the subject story. People were frightened, and the government said, it's a shutdown, stay at home. It was for our safety, and people complied. But after some time, though, more information came out. Perhaps the government had mishandled the situation. People came to resent being subject to those restrictions, and they had the right to choose, right? They're accustomed to living as a consumer. Some people chose not to wear masks, or they fought mask mandates. Every person for themselves, and if you get sick, it's somehow your fault. It's the consumer story. Throughout the pandemic, though, we did see glimpses of the citizen story. People got to know their neighbors and checked in on them. They banged pots and pans or sent cards and gifts to support frontline healthcare workers. Mutual aid networks were created or strengthened. And some people wore masks not to protect themselves, but to protect the most vulnerable around them. Some recognized that we are interdependent and that we were stronger and smarter together. Now, there's a lot more in the book that you could read. I'm not going to go into it, but the book states that we are living in the consumer story at this time, and that if we wish to survive much longer, we must instead live into that citizen story. Waiting for the very wealthy or the very powerful to save the day is not the solution. They write, quote, "The critical task is to redesign the organizations and institutions of our society. We are citizens by nature, but as things stand today, almost every interaction with almost every organization, business, government, even charity, conditions us to believe otherwise." They point out the fact that you get bonus points for shopping. It's a transaction, yeah. They go on. While our organizations remain trapped in the consumer story, they keep us trapped too. As such, to free ourselves, we will need to set them free as well. The hard truth is that our churches are included in those organizations living in the consumer story, with glimpses now and then of moving into the citizen story. As I was writing this, I realized that I invoked the consumer mindset even in our Exploring Membership class last week, because I talked about how what you get is more than what you give. It's a transaction, and thinking about your own personal needs, as if that's the most important thing about a congregation. And so, what will save the world? What will save us? What will save our faith? I'm not an expert, but I have some ideas about what will not save the world. We will not be saved by autocrats who would like to impose their will on the population. Now, for some portion of the population, this story is attractive. They would be willing to be subjects because they are frightened. And autocrats claim that following them will make us more secure. But I believe we will not be saved by trading our obedience to an autocrat in exchange for a false feeling of safety. We won't be able to shop our way out of the mess we're in, nor can we continue to think that our individual needs are the most important thing. What will save our congregations? What will save us? We have to move from what I want to what we need. Our congregations do not or should not serve individual preferences. Besides being short-sighted, trying to serve all the individual preferences is impossible. Do you know how many opinions y'all have? I can't make you all happy. This church can't make you all happy. But what do we need together to live our mission? We should serve a mission with love at the center that is dedicated to the thriving of all people, a mission that acknowledges our interdependence, that I am because you are, that what affects one of us affects all of us. Living faithfully as a you means putting aside the consumer story where I get what I want and getting busy being citizens where we find out what it is that we all need. Beloveds, the poet Ada Limón asks us, and these are no small questions, what would happen if we decided to survive more, to love harder, to use our bodies to bargain for the safety of others and for the earth? What would happen? What could happen? May the future of this world reflect that we answered faithfully and with reverence. Amen.